Hey everyone, Chris and Graham here again on Out of Left Field. Today's show is going to be a somber one. It's a show of farewells. One is bitterly sad and tragic, and the other one is a little bittersweet. At about 3:15 Eastern Time, the U.S. Coast Guard found the overturned boat of Jose Fernandez on a jetty at the mouth of the Miami harbor. Fernandez and two other men were killed in the accident. Major League Baseball canceled the Marlins game against the Braves, and the team held a heart-wrenching news conference. Graham, as a Floridian, as someone who's followed the Marlins, someone who's followed Jose Fernandez in particular, tell me what's going through your head right now.
To be honest with you, man, it's rare for me to ever get really personally affected, at least emotionally, by the death of a public figure. You know, you and I talked, Robin Williams was one just because of how, much of a genius he was in his craft. We talked about a personal one of mine off the air, but there's a hole in baseball right now, and it's a big one. We've had some players, some prospects this year who have passed away. The last really big one that I remember was, like I said, Darryl Kyle. When he was flying and actually just something malfunctioned on his plane and he crashed into a building of all places. I believe in New York, of all places, actually. I had a chance last year to see Jose Fernandez pitch. It was a last-second change of plans. He had a rehab start. He was supposed to go to New Orleans, which I believe is the Marlins AAA affiliate, and due to a tropical storm or some kind of severe weather, they moved him down to Jupiter, which is where they play spring training and where their high A affiliate is. And he just so happened to be pitching against the Brevard County Manatees. So I'm like 10 minutes down the road, find out day of. And, man, there was a buzz in the stadium to see him pitch, because this was the first time he was really back on the hill after Tommy John in a competitive fashion, besides of a stem game and that kind of stuff. And dude, he was grinning from ear to ear. I mean, it's the same smile that we came to know and recognize. He gave up a home run, I think in the first, to this kid. I don't even know the kid's name. Probably a kid that's never going to even sniff the bigs, but hit a homer off of what at that point was considered, and I think even today we still consider one of the best pitchers that was in the game. Had a ceiling that was going to put him up near some of the all-time greats. And, he was one of those, you've heard guys say, he never seemed to mind the whole idea of showboating. If you got one off of him, he'd grin and, he'd wear it like a champ, and then he'd come back and try to strike you out your next at bat. But what got me, and I happened to be one row up from the fence on their side of the field, so I was on the on-deck circle. And I'd talk to them a little bit, and other kids would call his name, and he'd turn, getting ready to bat, which you don't do in high A. They use a DH. And he'd flash that smile. And Don Mattingly said it pretty much perfectly today. There was a look of joy on his face every time he played. Every time you saw a camera on him, he was just happy. He was just like a kid playing Little League. I don't know, man. It's, they say things come in threes. You and I just found out that Arnold Palmer has passed away. I mean, you're a little older than me. You've seen some of the. I know you probably recall better than I do the players that died in the boating accident almost, I think, 20 or 30 years ago. Back in '93, I was actually at a game, a spring training game, when it happened, but I was 6. I don't recall as much, but I don't know. You and I have both seen. Emotions are running all over the place. It's tough, man. It really is tough.
Yeah. Personally, I think that the last really big, maybe not big name player, but the last really tragic death that I can remember in baseball that was widely publicized was when Oscar Taveras of the St. Louis Cardinals was killed just after the postseason ended in 2014. He died in a car crash in the Dominican Republic. But yeah, I can't remember a time when the accidental death of an active player was so widespread emotional outpouring throughout the baseball community.
The ripple effect of this, I think, has reached beyond what anybody would have thought, and I don't mean that in any way, obviously, to diminish what he was, but I think the thing I think that it's hard for you and I, as two white guys, is to understand that not only was he one of the best pitchers in the game, but as a person and what he meant to his community, the Cuban people, and of all things to be based in Miami. One of the quotes I've heard him say, I heard attributed to him, which I wish I had heard years before today, but he would look at guys he played with who were white and said, "You don't understand freedom. You were born into freedom." Coming from a guy who it took 4 trips for him to defect from Cuba to the United States. Went to high school in Tampa, was drafted 14th overall, I believe, by the Marlins. I think he played less than a half season in the minors, and all of a sudden was in the was in the big leagues. He became a naturalized citizen in 2015, and is expecting his first child, a daughter, and now all of a sudden that child who isn't born yet is going to grow up without a dad, and that's you're a parent, and I know that you and I talked when you were overseas, and granted you weren't going out on missions every day, but you and I tacitly always knew that concern was there, and when we needed to talk about it, we did. And when we didn't, we just kind of let it sit there and not become the elephant in the room.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to think about that little girl having to grow up without her father, especially a guy like Jose Fernandez, who's just always so upbeat, always so happy, just loves to play baseball, loves to just live. I mean, he was always smiling. He always had a big grin on his face no matter what happened. He's just he was one of those guys that walks in or walks onto a field or walks into a room and just brightens everybody's day. And I remember, the first time I really stopped to look at Jose Fernandez. It was actually a GIF that I watched online. It's probably one of the most popular baseball GIFs at the moment, even before today. Is that
the Tulowitzki one
where Tulowitzki hits that shot right back to him and stops about 3 steps down the first baseline and looks at him and goes, "Did you catch that?" And he goes, "Yeah, I did." And he's just grinning. I mean, he's got this huge smile on his face. He's like, yeah, I did. And that's the same smile that guy had all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, he was he loved life.
And he was never one to hold a grudge. You never really saw him carry a lot of bad blood over. Actually, against the Braves a couple of days ago, a series or 2 ago, they were in Atlanta. I guess maybe it was a week or so, and I think he had hit a Braves player. But anyway, he got his tower buzzed. It went behind him, and it was pretty up. And he kind of started making a move towards the mound. And Tyler Flowers, who was the Braves catcher, is a big boy. and you see him basically putting a hand in Fernandez's chest. And the Braves pitcher, I believe, was subsequently ejected. But then you see about 5 minutes later, Jose is just patting Flowers on the chest and, hey, I know it's all good. And you see them both kind of, hey, it wasn't anything personal, and, he wasn't trying, the regular rhetoric of, hey, he wasn't trying to hit you. But he kind of said, okay, he got back in the box. And, the only thing that he was mad about is, if you're going to hit me, just don't throw at my head. I mean, as a pitcher who, you expect that's the no, you don't hit the pitcher. He just kept saying, hey, not up here. Not up here.
Yeah.
He was a guy who at such a young age, at 24 years old, he had an understanding of the game, but had a love for the game of, what, it's a game. I mean, what comes, but it was infectious. And, you see the reaction of Eduardo Perez, who is an ESPN analyst and also an analyst for the Miami Marlins. His father, Hall of Famer Tony Perez, is an advisor for the Marlins. You see, he's tearing up on SportsCenter this morning. Don Mattingly is trying to hold it together. I think we've all seen, and you and I have discussed the pictures of Deke Gordon. You said it about as perfectly as I could think. Is he looked lost?
Yeah.
He was numb,
standing at that
he
pitcher's
looked
mound.
lost.
Yeah. Watching D. Gordon stand and then crouch in front of that giant number 16 that they had painted on the pitcher mound at Marlins Stadium, and just cry, is probably the most poignant picture that you could paint about what this guy meant to the Marlins organization, what he meant to the team, what he meant to his fellow players, what he meant to everybody, and then to watch the management and the ownership come to tears during the broadcast when they were broadcasting the
press conference.
Media press conference. It really painted a picture of how much he meant to the organization. And I've said a lot of things about the Marlins ownership just on this show. I don't think the guy's a good owner. I don't think that they have good ownership. I think they have a terrible disrespect for the people of Miami in particular. I think that they could do better, but I think today they pretty much nailed it.
Yeah.
And you could really see that it was very personal for them.
It was. He was a selfless guy. One of the stories that was told a lot today, and I didn't know this, on his fourth and finally successful attempt to defect to the United States, his mother was also on the boat or whatever it was that they were coming over here on.
Right.
And it was dark, and he heard a splash in the water. Somebody had fallen overboard. Didn't know who it was, but somebody had. And he jumps out just without regard for his own safety to save that person who happened to be his mother.
Yeah.
The selflessness with which he carried himself, the infectious personality nature about him. A lot of guys, and I heard Eric Hosmer compare him to Salvador Perez, because Perez is very much a joker as well. And and he said, it really is. It's a treat. It's an honor. It's a privilege to get to walk into a clubhouse every day with guys like that. And tonight, with a very heavy heart, and you saw a lot of guys that had the JF-16s on caps. Salvador Perez had it on his chest protector. Not playing tonight for the Cardinals is Aledmus Diaz, a guy who we discussed several weeks ago could have been the Rookie of the Year. And we have to do this as part of the show. Guys, if you ever want to look at our stuff, go ahead and take a look on our Facebook page. It's Out of Left Field, hosted by Graham and Chris. You'll see all of our past shows there, some recent stuff we've done. Obviously, I had Adnan Virk last week. So if you want to check us out, please do. But more so than that, send out a prayer to Jose Fernandez's family. Aledmus Diaz actually grew up on the same street with Jose Fernandez in Cuba. So, to think of what he is feeling, a guy, who he is, really, they've kind of, you have to think they've shaped each other.
Yeah.
And this is a baseball show. I know that you have an idea of how baseball could and probably could honor him. I'm not going to say that they should. They will do in their own way, and there is a way that I know that you see could be fitting, and it certainly would not be a mercy gift. It would be well earned. But I will say this, and if we want to discuss it, obviously much more calmly than our normal debates go, I wholeheartedly believe that number 16 should be going up in that Miami Marlins stadium for what he meant to that community. I mean, the fact that you have a Cuban-born player who has come to the United States, who had not forgotten where he came from and what he had endured and what it meant rather to him and to that community, to those people. You and I often discuss, well, does he deserve to have his number retired because of what he did on the field? Well, his numbers on the field were pretty damn good. He lost 2 games at home his entire career. But off the field, for everything that he meant to that city, he deserves to get that number retired.
Right. No, to be honest with you, I agree. I don't think that the precedence is there. Other teams that have players, even big name players, die middle of the season in tragic accidents, and their numbers don't get retired. Though Thurman Munson, who's the name that keeps seeming to come up when this conversation tries to come full circle. Thurman Munson was a player who played for the New York Yankees, died tragically in the middle of the season. Number was retired. So it's not completely unprecedented. I think that 4 years on the field makes it hard to look at what he's done on the field and say, we need to retire his number, but definitely what he's done off the field, what he meant to the city of Miami, what he meant to the Marlins organization, what the Marlins organization meant to him, what the city of Miami meant to him. Yeah, I can see the need to put his number on the wall.
And I think along that same token is his ceiling, his potential is glaringly obvious.
Right.
And it's one of the few times that you can take that and make a pretty fair case that he wasn't going to slow down anytime soon.
Right. We're talking about a guy who started 76 games in his tragically short career, and won 38 of them. He was 38-17 career, had a .691 career win-loss percentage, a .258 career ERA, and what I think is the most incredible stat, he faced 1,888 batters in that 4-year period, and he struck out 589 of them. He averaged 11.2 strikeouts per 9 innings pitched in his career. This season, he was averaging 12.5, which is not only good enough for best in the league this season, it's good enough for 5th best all time in a single season. I think.
Now, I want to ask you one question, and if you may not have it. You mentioned to me earlier today when we were prepping the names on that list. Do you have those names? Because it's the one thing you held back on me for, and I'm just curious as to, the company that he keeps. I know you're looking.
Yeah, the company that he keeps is a hell of a list. The number one with a strikeouts per nine of 13.4 is Randy Johnson, followed by Pedro Martinez at 13.2, Kerry Wood at 12.5, and then Randy Johnson again at 12.5, and then Jose Fernandez, and then Randy Johnson, and Yu Darvish. That's the top 10.
I mean, and it's pretty clear by the fact of the 14 strikeout games.
So 6 times Randy Johnson, and then Kerry Wood, Pedro Martinez, Jose Fernandez, and Yu Darvish.
Yeah, and it's
against the Dodgers, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was, it is, man. It reminds me as we kind of, I think, begin to slowly try and move away from the darkest moment we've seen in baseball in quite a while. It reminds me of a quote by a legend, and that quote is that is the way the game is. You win, you lose, you celebrate, and you suffer. And that quote was said by none other than Vin Scully, the legendary voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers for almost 3/4 of a century, 67 years. Vin Scully has been in the broadcast booth. And as everyone, I think, pretty much now knows, this is it. He has decided that it is time to drop the mic, so to speak, and to move on.
Yeah. It's been a hell of a ride, right? I think that Vin Scully is without a doubt going to be remembered as the greatest announcer, television personality, or voice of a team of all time, ever. I mean, you can name off guys like Harry Carey. There are other voices in sports that people will remember, but Vin Scully has been the voice of the Dodgers since the Dodgers were in Brooklyn. Vin Scully announced that the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers, were world champions.
He announced Don Larson's perfect game in the World
Sandy
Series.
Koufax's too.
Yes. But it wasn't just the voice was iconic, but it was his innate ability to paint a picture. One of the most amazing stories that I had heard, and Jason Stark on ESPN put out a fantastic article just full of anecdotes of Vin Scully. And I want to say it was Bob Costas who told the story, but I may be wrong. And I believe Ray Charles had sang America the Beautiful. Again, I heard the story briefly, so I'm trying not to mess it up. But anyway, he asked if he could meet Vin Scully. They said, Ray, of all people, why would you want to meet Vin Scully? He said, because Vin Scully is the guy that lets me see the game. And that was it. I mean, I remember hearing someone say that there was a play, a little dribbler down the field, and he said that the batter looked at the ball and scampered down the line like a scared rabbit. And there is no other broadcaster in the world that I could think of who would come up with something like that, yet that was exactly what everyone said it looked like. And, the respect that he has from so many people, it's amazing. As a kid, and I think you and I agree, as a kid, it was almost boring. You didn't understand what he was when you were young. It's like, man, where's kind of the gumption, where's the go? And then as you get older and you kind of mature into the game, you understand just what it meant to have him there. I've got more things I can talk about, and I will, but I don't know. You live out there, and I know you're a Giants fan, but obviously you've grown up near Los Angeles. Dude, next year, no David Ortiz, tragically no Jose Fernandez, and no Vin Scully.
Yeah, and where you see a guy like Vin Scully retire after 67 years on the air, after 67 years with the Dodgers organization, it's sad, but at the same time, you realize that that's the end of an era, completely different from the tragedy that is Jose Fernandez's death. But Vin Scully has, in the last 67 years, made some of the most off-the-wall and hilarious comments to other announcers, to ball players, about ball players. He's really is a master of visual description. He's a person who can take what's going on the field and give you a picture of it so clearly in your head. And he says, he said, I really love baseball, the guys and the game, and I love the challenge of describing things. And that's him. That's what he did. That's what he's always done. But I think he's going to be most remembered probably for the way he called home runs, which was very simply just forget it. It's gone. Things he said that at the time just sounded like, space filler. Things like it's a mere moment in a man's life between the All-Star game and an old-timers game. It sounds like something just somebody says, that doesn't really mean anything at the time, and you look back at it and you're like, wow.
And as a writer, as a published writer, for those of you who don't know, Chris is a published writer. He has written, I'm not quite sure, is it a novel? I'm not quite sure what it classifies as. But it's very...
It's a novella.
A novella. Not Spanish novella. Let's not get everyone confused. But right. It is, for those of you who have the stomach for it and want to know what it really is like for those guys who have been overseas and have come back. And this is to be, it is a work of fiction, but there's a lot of fact behind it. So again, for those of you who are interested, you can find it on Google. What all do you have? What all is it available to? It's an ebook, correct?
Yeah, it's an ebook. It's also available in print. It's on iTunes. It's on Amazon. It's on Nook. It's on pretty much any ebooks website. It's on there. It's also available in print if you go to thewarwriterscampaign.org. You can order what's called the Voices of War Anthology, 2015. It's in there. And if you're interested, take a look at it. I don't like it. I don't like anything I write, but it's gotten a lot of good press. It's called 3 Days in Diyala, which is the province in Iraq that I spent 12 months of my life in.
I guess and it brings me kind of back full circle is, as someone who has written and still writes and is still in school for writing, I know that you can understand and clearly respect the ability for someone he has no editor, he doesn't get to hit backspace, it's fluid. And who would have thought almost 30 years ago that Vin Scully would have said something that, as eloquently as we kind of transitioned from a time in baseball into something new, that it would be so fitting of him. He said this when the NBC Game of the Week was coming to an end in 1989, so 2 years after I was born. And he said, "It's a passing of a great American tradition. It is sad. I really and truly feel that. It will leave a vast window, to use a Washington word, where people will not get Major League Baseball, and I think that's a tragedy."
And it's such a great quote, because you alter that a little bit, and it fits the passing of Jose Fernandez. You alter it a little bit, and it fits the retirement of Vin Scully himself. It's succinct, and I think that really is how you can sum up Vin Scully. Vin Scully's talked a lot, obviously. I mean, he was a sports broadcaster. Sports broadcasters talk a great deal, but what he said and how he said it was very succinct. Like when he was talking about Bob Larson, when Bob Larson pitched a perfect game in the World Series.
Don Larson.
Don Larson pitched a perfect game in the 1956 World Series. The Brooklyn Dodgers. Don Larson. A lot of announcers would sit there and jabber as you go into the ninth inning and talk about what's going on, talk about the statistics, talk about what's happened, talk about how hitters are hitting, and talk about how the defense is playing. And Vin Scully very simply said, let's all take a deep breath as we go into the most dramatic ninth inning in the history of baseball. I'm going to sit back, light up, and hope I don't chew the cigarette into pieces.
He was a man who, in something you and I have obviously come to learn, in a profession where silence is deadly, he learned how to make silence work for him, and when silence was necessary. There's a fantastic piece out, and actually, if you go to MLB videos, you can see it's like a 3 or 4 minute video, but for the last almost 2 decades, and I had never even known this, being the umpire of our twosome. Every single umpire crew that has walked, into Chavez Ravine has turned and tipped their cap up to the press box at Vin Scully. And it started at Dodger Town when Bruce Fremming turned and tipped his cap to him. They had dinner one night. And Vin Scully had, and I'm paraphrasing, had said to Bruce, I don't ever mess with umpires. There's only one thing about umpires that chaps my rear end. And that's when they don't let me know when it's a strike or a ball. When I don't know what I'm calling, I get upset. But other than that, I never have a problem with you guys, and I'll never say anything bad. And there has been, other videos going around of when an umpire named Stu Sherwater made his Major League debut in 2014, and he happened to make his debut in Dodger Stadium. And Vin Scully, honored him, said, hey, a great career ahead for this kid. He's come up here. He's from, and gave, a quick biography of this kid, 30 seconds maybe. But guys who have been in the World Series, guys who are crew chiefs, assistant crew chiefs. Jim Reynolds said that he'd been in the bigs almost 5 years, and he made the big leagues when the leagues were still separated. And when they combined the leagues, he said, I was hired in the American League. The first time that I walked into Dodger Stadium, he said, I recorded the game just to hear Vin Scully say my name. He said, and that was the time I finally felt like, man, I've made it. And I had been in the bigs almost 5 years to that point.
Wow.
So, I mean, imagine that. I mean, a guy who, and it's true, he has shown immense deference and respect to every facet of the game.
Not always to the Dodgers. He was 67 years with the Dodgers organization. He was always a realist. Okay. In 1990, Vin Scully said the Dodgers are such a 500 team that if there was a way to split a 3-game series, they'd find it. So he wasn't always deferential to the Dodgers as a team. He was always very realistic about who they were.
So it's fitting, and it's unfortunate for our postseason picks. But it's fitting that the Dodgers win on a walk-off home run today to clinch the National League West for the last home game that Vin Scully will call. I think it's awesome that the final games of the season come in San Francisco, so he will travel to San Francisco for those games.
And his final game of the season on October 2nd,
I believe so.
Next Sunday. The third inning of the Giants broadcast will be Vin Scully calling the third inning.
That's awesome.
So that's going to be their tribute to him. Their television broadcast is going to be the third inning called by Vin Scully. I mean, how do you say anything about somebody who did so much for the game of baseball, except maybe tell about where he started, right?
Yeah.
He said when he was a kid or when he was young, he said, I would come home and listen to a football game. There weren't any other sports on, and I would get a pillow and I would crawl under the radio so that the loudspeaker and the roar of the crowd would wash all over me, and I would just get goosebumps like you can't believe. And I knew that of all the things in this world that I wanted to be that fella saying, whatever, home run or touchdown. It just really got to me.
And, it's painful, where we were going to go with today's show, and we will hold on to several of those topics, including Jacob deGrom's injury and Steve Clevenger's suspension for next week.
We have a lot to say about Steve Clevenger. We just didn't want to. We didn't want to mar today's program.
It wasn't fitting for today, but it's painful. It's sad to think that a legend and a man who I think would have been a legend, especially in his city, but in the game, we have to say farewell to. And I'll close it with this quote from Vin Scully. He said, I love baseball, and I don't want to be part of anything that would cheapen it or vulgarize it. Well, then we have won and celebrated the 67 years that you've given us, and now we have to say goodbye to that voice and suffer with the emptiness that leaves at the game. You made the game better by being in it. We thank you. We will miss you. We hope that you all have a great week. Hug those close to you. Life's short. Enjoy it. Take care of it. We will see you all back next week on Out of Left Field.